The cub led them straight into a mystery no one understood. A tiny lion cub crawled out of Ellie's barn that morning, shivering, desperate, and clinging to her like she was his last hope. She thought he was just lost, until she followed him to a trail of blood behind the old shed. What she found there stopped her heart cold and dragged her into a race to save a dying mother in the middle of a coming storm. The morning had started like any other on the Whitmore family farm. The kind of quiet Idaho dawn that carried the smell of hay, frost, and wood smoke. Ellie tugged her jacket tighter as she crossed the yard, her boots crunching over the thin layer of ice that had settled overnight. She was only 14, but she knew every inch of the place. The way the old barn groaned in the cold, the rhythm of the horses waiting for breakfast, the soft creak of the stable door when she pushed it open. She was humming to herself as she filled the feed bucket, letting the warm breath of the horses brush her cheek when they leaned toward her. The world felt peaceful, familiar. But as she bent down to scoop another load of grain, something faint drifted through the stable, a sound too soft to fit the morning, a tiny, broken cry. Ellie froze. At first, she thought maybe a kitten had wandered in, or a rabbit had gotten stuck somewhere in the walls. She waited, holding her breath, listening closely. There it was again, a trembling whimper, thin as a thread. Her heart picked up. She set the bucket aside and stepped toward the back of the stable. Dust motes floated in the cold beam of morning light, slipping through the boards. The horses stirred uneasily, ears swiveling toward the sound, as if they sensed something she didn't. Ellie crouched, brushing stray hay out of the way. The whimpering grew louder. Then, suddenly, the mound of ruffled straw moved. She jerked back, startled, and then it emerged. A tiny shape, so small she thought her eyes were tricking her, dragged itself forward through the hay. Its tawny coat was matted, its breaths shallow. When it raised its head, Ellie felt the air leave her chest. A lion cub. An honest-to-goodness lion cub, no bigger than a farm cat, trembling violently as it tried to stand on unsteady legs. Its eyes, huge, golden, shimmering with fear, locked onto hers. Before Ellie could even react, the cub stumbled forward and pressed its tiny paws against the toe of her boot. She gasped softly, her whole body stiffening. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She had seen lions only through screens and books, never imagined one could be close enough to touch, close enough to breathe the same cold air. But this one wasn't dangerous. It wasn't roaring or clawing. It was begging. The cub let out another small cry, so full of desperation it seemed to split her heart right down the center. Ellie's breath trembled as she slowly lowered herself onto her knees. The straw whispered beneath her, the horses shifting behind her as if sensing the strangeness of the moment. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "It's okay, little one." She reached out a trembling hand, afraid to scare it, afraid of hurting it, and afraid of what it meant that a wild creature like this was here, alone, in her family's barn. But the cub didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into her touch with heartbreaking trust, resting its weight, what little it had, against her palm. Its body felt like nothing more than bones and chilled fur. She could feel it shivering. "Oh, you're freezing," Ellie murmured. She looked around, panicked, searching for any sign of where it might have come from. Lions didn't belong in Idaho. Not out here. Not anywhere near her family's farm. Somehow the world felt suddenly too big and too dangerous for her to understand. The cub whimpered again, its head dropping weakly. Its paws slid from her boot as it sagged to one side. Ellie reacted without thinking. She slipped her arms under its tiny body, warmth rushing through her hands as she lifted it and cradled it to her chest. Its fur brushed her chin, coarse and damp from the cold. It didn't fight. It didn't thrash. It simply let her hold it, as if she were the last safe thing it recognized in the world. Her heart pounded, every instinct torn between fear and the overwhelming urge to protect the fragile life pressed against her. She didn't know where its mother was. She didn't know how it had gotten here, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She couldn't leave it. Ellie took a shaky breath, her thoughts spinning, her arms tightening just a little around the trembling cub. Something was terribly wrong, and she was the one who had just stepped into the middle of it. Ellie held the tiny lion cub against her chest, feeling its trembling seep straight through her jacket, its breath warm but fragile against her collarbone. The stable felt too quiet now, the horses strangely restless, stamping their hooves as if they sensed danger just beyond the walls. Ellie swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears as she backed slowly toward the bench by the entrance where an old wool blanket hung. She lowered herself onto the bench and wrapped the cub gently, tucking the edges around its shivering body. It blinked up at her, eyes glossy with fear and something deeper, something she didn't know wild animals could show so plainly. Trust, desperation. Ellie wasn't sure which one frightened her more. "There you go. Just breathe," she whispered, sliding her fingers under its chin to lift its drooping head. The cub's small paws clung to her sleeve, tiny claws catching on the fabric, not in aggression, but in a kind of plea. It made that soft, broken cry again, the one that had pulled her across the stable to begin with. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just hurt. It was begging, and the way it kept turning its head toward the open stable door, toward the stretch of frosted pasture beyond, made Ellie's stomach twist. Something was out there, something it wanted her to see. She hesitated, watching its eyes as they flicked again toward the yard, the same way a child might glance toward a parent trapped behind a door. A silent signal, a wordless request. "You're trying to tell me something," Ellie murmured. The cub let out a faint, breathy sound and pressed its paw into her arm as if urging her to stand. She could feel a tremor of urgency under its trembling. Every instinct in her said to stay put. Call her dad, call Grandpa Whitmore, call someone who knew what they were doing. But the cub was already trying to climb out of her arms, whining toward the stable exit, its body too weak to move more than a few inches before collapsing again into her hands. Ellie lifted it close, her heart clenching as she rose to her feet. Okay, little one. I'm coming. Just show me where." As she stepped out of the stable and into the cold morning air, the world felt different, quieter, heavier. Frosted breath puffed from her lips as she scanned the yard. Nothing looked out of place. The sky was pale blue, and the snow-dusted fields lay still under the rising sun. But the cub in her arms whimpered again and turned its head sharply toward the far end of the barn. Ellie followed its gaze. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. But her feet were already moving, crunching over the frozen ground as she crossed the yard. She tried to keep her steps smooth so the cub wouldn't jostle too much. Each time she shifted her weight, it pushed its forehead weakly against her chest, as if drawing strength from her heartbeat. When she rounded the corner of the barn, a faint wind swept up, carrying the scent of hay, soil, and something metallic, something sharp and unnerving. Ellie paused. The cub let out a whine so soft she almost missed it, nudging its nose from beneath the blanket. "What is it?" she whispered, barely breathing. Then she saw it, a smear of dull, dried red across the frozen dirt. Not fresh, but not old either. Ellie tightened her grip on the cub. The smear stretched out in a crooked line toward the back pasture, toward the storage shed and the old cattle pen no one used anymore. "I don't like this," she said under her breath, but her feet kept moving anyway. With every step, the cub squirmed harder, its tiny body pulsing with raw urgency. Ellie stopped beside the barn wall and knelt, letting the cub's head peek out from the blanket. It stared intensely at the trail of red, its tiny mouth opening in a soft cry, before looking up at her, eyes wide and pleading. "You want me to follow it?" Ellie breathed. "Don't you?" The cub blinked slowly, then lowered its head, as if too tired to hold it up any longer. Ellie held the small body close again, her breath shaking. She didn't understand how a wild animal could communicate so clearly, but she felt it, felt the pull beneath her ribs, felt that strange certainty rising in her chest. It needed her, and someone else needed help. She followed the trail across the thin snow, the barn towering behind her as she moved into the open stretch of pasture. The cold bit into her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her focus tunneled into the winding smear ahead, the way it curved oddly, as though whatever left it had stumbled, maybe collapsed. The cub's breathing quickened as they approached the end of the dirt path where the cattle pen posts leaned in the wind. The boards creaked faintly, and a loose rope slapped against a fence rail. Ellie took a slow breath, her fingers numb around the blanket's edge. Then she saw the second sign, something half buried in the frost. A twisted strand of broken wire, barbed, snapped violently. Her heart lurched. She crouched, shifting the cub in one arm while picking up the wire with the other. The metal was cold, but there was a faint, faded stain on it, a reddish-brown shadow clinging to the barbs. A snare trap. Illegal. Dangerous. Something her grandfather had warned her about every winter when trespassers cut across Whitmore land. "Oh no," she whispered. At that moment the cub whimpered louder and tried to push against her forearm, as if insisting she move faster. Ellie stood, her legs shaking beneath her. The world around her felt suddenly sharper, as if the air itself had thinned. She didn't need anyone to explain what a broken snare and a blood trail meant. Somewhere ahead, somewhere close, something had been caught. Something big. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, clenching her jaw with determination she didn't know she had. "I'll find her. I promise." She followed the trail past the pen, past the sagging boards and leaning posts, until she reached the edge of the old hay shed. The cub let out a desperate, high-pitched cry, pushing its head out of the blanket. Ellie froze. There, just beyond the collapsed rake and the pile of scattered straw, she saw more blood, darker, fresh-looking, and deep grooves in the dirt, as if something heavy had dragged itself forward. Her breath stuttered. The cub whimpered again, louder this time, its whole body trembling. Something was waiting behind that shed. Something hurt. Something helpless. Ellie felt her heartbeat thudding painfully in her chest, and she stepped forward. The wind pushed against her as if trying to warn her back, carrying with it the sharp bite of Idaho winter. She tightened her grip on the lion cub tucked in the blanket, its tiny body trembling with fear and exhaustion. Each step toward the back corner of the old hay shed felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself understood what waited for her and wanted to hold her in place. But the cub whimpered again, a soft, desperate cry that cut straight through every ounce of hesitation inside her, and she forced herself onward. The smell hit her first, not strong, not overwhelming, but enough to make her breath hitch. A mix of cold earth and something metallic, something that didn't belong on a quiet farm morning. Ellie braced herself against the shed wall and peered around the corner. At first, she saw only shadows. Long beams of pale morning light slipped through gaps in the wooden planks, flickering across the ground in broken stripes. The straw was disturbed, tossed around as though something had struggled. Ellie's eyes followed the patterns until they landed on the darker streaks, drag marks curving through the frost, leading into the narrow space behind the shed. Her chest tightened. The cub tensed in her arms, its head lifting just enough for a soft cry that sounded like fear choking on hope. "I'm here," Ellie whispered, more to steady herself than the cub. She crouched low so she wouldn't spook whatever was ahead, moving slowly in the crunch of frozen dirt. The shed boards creaked above her, bending with the wind. For a moment she almost turned back, almost ran to the house, to her grandfather, to anyone who could tell her what to do. But the cub nudged its nose against her arm, urging her forward. She inched around the shed's back wall and finally saw what the trail had been leading to. At first her mind rejected it, a shape too large, too still, too unreal for her to process. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light and the outlines sharpened, the truth came crashing down like the snap of a frozen branch. A lioness. A real lioness. She lay collapsed on her side, her tawny coat dull and streaked with dirt and frost. One of her hind legs was twisted at an angle that made Ellie's stomach drop, and around the ankle was a brutal metal snare, tight, sharp, and sunk so deeply into the flesh that Ellie couldn't see where the wire ended and the wound began. Dried blood clung to the tangled grass beneath her, darkened by the cold. The lioness lifted her head weakly when Ellie arrived, her breath fogging faintly in the freezing air. Her eyes opened only halfway, heavy, exhausted, and filled with a kind of pain Ellie had never seen in any living creature. Yet beneath that pain was something else, something heartbreakingly human. Recognition. Ellie didn't move. She felt frozen in place, rooted to the earth. She knew she should be afraid. This was a wild predator, a fully grown lion, a creature that in any other moment could overpower her without effort. Her mind screamed at her to back away, to run, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Because the lioness didn't look like a monster. She looked like a mother. Her gaze drifted toward the cub in Ellie's arms, and a strained, breathy sound came from her throat. Too soft to be a growl. Too weak to be anything but a plea. When the cub tried to wriggle free from the blanket, Ellie instinctively tightened her hold. "No, not yet. Please, just stay with me," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the cub or to herself. The lioness blinked slowly, as though trying to reassure her. Then her head sagged back into the straw. The motion was so small, so defeated, that Ellie felt her knees weaken. She knelt down carefully several feet away, the cold seeping through her jeans. "It's okay. I'm here," she said softly, though her voice broke on the words. Her fingertip brushed the cub's cheek as she leaned forward a little more, her eyes sweeping over the lioness's injuries. The metal snare had dug so deep that her fur was matted around the wound, the flesh swollen and inflamed. The lioness's breathing hitched every few seconds, a shallow struggle that told Ellie just how close she was to her limit. "Oh no, oh no," Ellie whispered, her throat tightening until she could barely breathe. She wanted to reach out, to touch the lioness gently, the way she had touched the cub, but fear and heartbreak pinned her hands to her lap. The lioness made another faint noise, her head lifting just enough for her eyes to meet Ellie's again. Something passed between them in that brief moment. Fear, desperation, and a silent, fragile thread of trust. The cub cried again, louder this time, a trembling sound that echoed against the shed wall. As soon as the lioness heard it, her body flinched, a spark of instinct piercing through her exhaustion. She tried, truly tried, to push herself up, muscles straining against the snare, but the pain was too sharp. Her leg buckled immediately, and she collapsed back into the straw with a broken breath. Ellie felt tears sting her eyes. "It's okay," she said shakily, shifting on her knees. "Don't hurt yourself. I'll get help, I promise." The cub struggled in her arms, trying with all its strength to wiggle closer to its mother. Ellie loosened the edge of the blanket just enough so the lioness could see her baby clearly. The mother's eyes softened, her ears twitching weakly as the cub whimpered, a mother reaching for her child, a child reaching back, and a snare trapping one of them between life and death. Ellie pressed her free hand against her chest, trying to steady her racing heartbeat. She had never felt so small, so helpless, so aware that she was standing in a moment that mattered more than anything she'd ever faced. She needed help, real help, and fast. Her fingers fumbled for her phone. She couldn't look away from the lioness as she dialed with trembling hands, her voice barely recognizable when the call connected. "Please," she whispered into the receiver, eyes locked on the wounded mother. "Please, I need the wildlife rescue unit. There's a lioness. She's trapped, and she's dying." But even as she gave the information, tears slipped silently down her cheeks, because she had seen the truth in the lioness's eyes. The mother wasn't asking for her own life. She was begging Ellie to save her cub, and Ellie knew, whether she was ready or not, she was now part of that promise. Her fingers trembled so hard she nearly dropped the phone, but she forced herself to press the call button again. The lioness lay only a few feet away, her breaths shallow, each one sounding like it scraped against pain too deep to name. The cub whimpered in the crook of Ellie's arm, pushing its head toward its mother, reaching for her with that tiny, helpless longing only a baby could have. Ellie swallowed against the tightness in her throat and pressed the phone to her ear. The cold air bit at her cheeks as the call connected with a soft click. "Wildlife Response Unit, this is Deputy Mark Coleman speaking." Just hearing a calm adult voice nearly made her break down completely. She clutched the phone tighter. "Mr. Coleman?" Ellie's voice cracked, thin as the frost around her. I need help. There's a lion here. A lioness. She's trapped. I think she's dying." There was a beat of silence on the other end, the kind that fills the air when reality shifts into something unbelievable. "A lion?" Mark repeated, steady and professional, but clearly surprised. "Young lady, are you in any immediate danger?" Ellie shook her head before remembering he couldn't see her. "No, she's not trying to hurt me. She's hurt. Really hurt. And her cub, he came to find me. I think he was looking for help." The cub let out a soft cry, as if agreeing. The lioness tried weakly to lift her head again, her eyes glassy with pain. Ellie's heart twisted. Mark's tone shifted instantly, alert, urgent, all business. "All right, slow down for me. Tell me exactly where you are." Ellie described the location behind the old hay shed, explaining the broken snare, the blood trail, the way the lioness could barely breathe. She stumbled over some words, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. But Mark listened patiently, absorbing every detail. "Okay," he said firmly once she finished. "You did the right thing calling. Stay exactly where you are. Keep yourself safe. My team is mobilizing now." "Please hurry," Ellie whispered. "She doesn't look like she has long." "We're coming," he assured her. "I'll stay on the line with you until the others are ready to move." Ellie nodded, even though her entire body was trembling. She lowered herself to the ground again, kneeling in the cold dirt. The lioness watched her with unfocused eyes, each blink slower than the one before. Ellie placed the cub close to her chest and held him gently, her other hand bracing herself in the straw. "You're not alone," Ellie whispered to the lioness, hoping somehow the animal understood. "Help is coming, I promise." The lioness closed her eyes. Whether from relief or exhaustion, Ellie couldn't tell. "Ellie," Mark's voice came through the phone again. "You said the snare is around her leg, correct?" "Yes. I can see the metal. It's cutting deep. She tried to stand when she heard the cub, but she couldn't." "That tells me her instinct is still strong," he said. "That's good news. It means if we stabilize her quickly enough, she has a chance." Ellie let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "She's suffering so much." "I know," Mark replied gently. "But you've already given her a fighting chance. Just stay calm, Doctor. Harper Quinn and the team are gearing up now. Ellie didn't feel calm, not even close, but she nodded anyway. A gust of wind swept through the narrow space, rattling the boards of the shed and chilling Ellie straight to the bone. She leaned slightly toward the lioness, trying to block the wind from her face. The lioness reacted with the faintest twitch of her ear, and Ellie could have sworn the cub felt it too because he pushed himself harder against her, letting out a tiny, aching whimper. Ellie brought the phone closer. "What if she doesn't make it until you get here?" Mark's answer came swift and steady. "She will. Just keep talking to me. Keep the cub warm, and make sure you don't get too close to her injured side." Ellie bit her lip. "She's not trying to hurt me, she just looks so tired." Tired animals can still react unpredictably, especially mothers. Just keep a safe distance, but stay where you can see her. Ellie nodded again, shifting back slightly, while still letting the lioness see her and the cub. The mother's eyes opened halfway, glazing over Ellie's face as if memorizing the shape of the person that her baby had chosen to trust. A fragile connection passed between them. No words, just a shared understanding in the frozen morning air. "Mark?" Ellie whispered quietly. "I'm here." Why would her cub come find me? Why not just hide? There was a pause as though the deputy weighed his answer. "Because he didn't have any other hope," he said finally. "And somehow, he chose you." Ellie's breath trembled. She looked down at the cub's small head tucked under her chin, his tiny body relaxing slightly with her warmth. "I won't let him down," she whispered. "I know you won't," Mark said. "And I see your location on the map now. We're almost ready to roll out." The wind howled suddenly around the shed, swirling through the straw. The lioness's body tensed at the sound, her eyes cracking open again. Ellie reached out, palm up, keeping her movements slow and steady. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're not alone anymore." The lioness blinked weakly, her breath catching as she tried to shift her injured leg. Ellie's heart clenched at the sight, but before she could say anything else, Mark's voice cut back in. "Ellie, the team is leaving the station now. We're on the way." She let out a shaky sob of relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Stay with her," Mark said gently. "You're doing good, kiddo." Ellie lowered the cub just enough so the lioness could see him clearly. The mother gave the faintest, broken hum in her throat, a sound so fragile it nearly broke Ellie in two. "I'm here," Ellie whispered again, tears running down her cheeks despite the cold. "Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer, please." The lioness exhaled slowly, her eyes softening. And Ellie stayed there, kneeling in the frost, holding the cub close, knowing the promise she had stepped into was bigger than fear, bigger than doubt. She was part of their fight now, and she wouldn't leave them. Ellie wiped the cold tears from her cheeks, steadying her breath as the wind howled harder across the farmyard. The lioness lay only a few feet away, her shallow breaths fogging faintly in the freezing air. The cub whimpered again, burrowing deeper into the blanket Ellie held against her chest. She rocked him gently, as if he were a lost child, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The phone in her hand buzzed, breaking through the wind. Mark's voice came through, firmer now, layered with the clipped urgency of a man used to emergencies. "All right, Ellie. Listen carefully. My team is rolling out. Dr. Harper Quinn is prepping medical gear, and we've got officers loading restraint equipment just in case. I need you to stay put, stay low, and stay calm." Ellie nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I will. I promise." "Good," Mark said. "And Ellie, thank you for staying with her. Most folks would have run." Ellie looked at the lioness, her head resting heavily on the frozen straw, her legs pulled tight from pain, her breath uneven and frail. No part of Ellie understood how any person could walk away from that. As Mark coordinated in the background, Ellie began to hear the faint rise of organized chaos behind him. The sound of boots on concrete, metal rattling, radios crackling with clipped code words. She could almost picture it. Emergency lights flicking on inside the wildlife station, gear being thrown into trucks, a rush of determined people running to fight time for an animal who could not speak for herself. The lioness lifted her head weakly, eyes drifting toward the cub. Ellie leaned closer, adjusting the blanket so the mother could see him. The cub let out another soft cry, reaching out with one tiny paw. The lioness's ears flicked. Even now, even drowning in pain, she recognized her baby. "Hold on," Ellie whispered. "They're coming." Through the phone, she heard someone call out, "Dr. Quinn, we've got a cold front rolling in. Visibility could drop." Mark answered, firm and steady, "We roll anyway. That mother doesn't have time." More voices followed, overlapping, checking oxygen tanks, securing crates, snapping latches, calling out route maps. Ellie clutched the phone tight, heart pounding. This wasn't some small local team. This was a full response, an emergency rescue workforce prepping to fight the cold, the terrain, and a ticking clock to save a wounded predator. The cub stirred anxiously, sensing the tension from the lioness and the tightening temperature. Ellie tucked him closer, warming his body with her own. "You're okay," she murmured. "You did the brave thing. You found someone. Now it's my turn." The howling wind grew sharper. A storm was gathering. She could feel it in the air, in the brittle hush settling over the farmland, in the way the trees creaked like old bones. The lioness shivered once, her muscles tightening in instinctive fear. Ellie scooted forward, using her body to shield as much of the cold as she could. Her phone crackled again. "Ellie, we're leaving the main road now," Mark said. "ETA 15 minutes, maybe less if the weather holds." "Okay," she whispered. "I'll keep her awake." "That would help," he confirmed. "Just talk to her. Your voice is the only thing keeping her grounded right now." Ellie swallowed hard. She had never been more afraid of saying the wrong thing in her life. But when she looked into the lioness's dimming eyes, words came from a place deeper than fear. "You're not alone," she whispered gently. "Your baby's right here, and help is coming. You just have to hold on. Please." The lioness blinked slowly as if listening. Ellie reached out with trembling fingers and slid her hand into the straw, not touching the lioness, but close enough she could feel the warmth radiating from her battered body. In the distance, she heard the faint rumble of engines, trucks, big ones, multiple vehicles. The sound grew louder, cutting through the winter air like hope in motion. The cub lifted his head, ears twitching. Even the lioness managed to open her eyes a little wider. "They're here," Ellie breathed. A few seconds later, the first lights appeared, bright beams slicing through the falling snow as 3 wildlife rescue trucks rolled onto the Whitmore property. Their tires crunched over the frost, engines humming low and steady as they approached. Ellie's heart surged with relief so intense her eyes filled again. The trucks slowed, forming a coordinated stop near the barn. Doors opened quickly. Figures stepped out into the cold, bundled in heavy jackets with reflective stripes, carrying medical kits, stretchers, and protective gear. Mark Coleman was the first to spot her. He jogged toward the back of the shed, hand lifted in reassurance. "Ellie, stay exactly where you are." Behind him came Dr. Harper Quinn, a woman with kind, steady eyes and a medical kit strapped over her shoulder, followed by 2 wildlife officers and a veterinary tech. Their movements were fast but careful, every step measured with practiced urgency. Ellie shifted slightly so they could see the lioness clearly. Mark's face tightened the moment he laid eyes on the snare wound. "Good Lord," he muttered under his breath. But then he looked at Ellie, this small girl kneeling in the frost, holding a wild cub in her arms, and something like respect flickered across his face. You did good. Dr. Harper crouched beside Ellie, her voice soft but precise. Sweetheart, I'm going to take a look at her, all right? You just hold that little one steady. Ellie nodded, clutching the cub. Please help her, she whispered. We're going to do everything we can, Dr. Sermon, Harper promised. The lioness stirred weakly as they approached, her muscles tensing in fear and instinct. The officers moved slowly, speaking in low tones meant to soothe. Dr. Harper checked her pulse, examined the snare, and exchanged grave glances with the others. This is deep, she said quietly. But she's still fighting. She waited for us, Ellie whispered. No, Dr. Harper corrected gently, placing a gloved hand near the lioness's head. She waited for you. Mark stood and gave the signal. All right, team. This is now a priority extraction. Storm's getting worse. We move fast. We move careful. Ellie held the cub a little tighter as the rescue team prepared their equipment. The fight to save this family had officially begun, and Ellie was right in the center of it. The wind cut sharply across the open pasture as the rescue team gathered around the injured lioness, their breath steaming in the freezing air. Snowflakes drifted sideways now, pushed by a rising gust that hinted at the storm building in the mountains. Ellie hugged the cub tightly, feeling its trembling grow stronger as the cold deepened and the sounds around them grew louder. Boots crunching, zippers snapping, metal clasps clicking into place. Dr. Harper crouched beside the lioness, her gloved hands moving with calm precision. Pulse weak but present, she murmured. Skin cold. She's losing strength, but she's still fighting. We need to get her stabilized before we even think about moving her. Mark stepped beside her, his radio crackling at his shoulder. Visibility's dropping fast. We've got maybe 30 minutes before this storm really hits. We need to keep this tight. Then let's get started, Dr. Harper replied. Ellie lowered herself to the ground a few feet away. The cub pressed firmly against her chest. His tiny claws gripped her jacket as if anchoring himself, his breathing quick and rapid. The lioness tried to lift her head again when she heard his cry, but the effort drained her. She fell back into the straw with a painful groan. Ellie's stomach twisted. Is there anything I can do? She asked softly. Dr. Harper glanced over with warm but serious eyes. Just stay with him. Your voice is familiar now. That's helping him stay calm. And if he's calm, she's calmer. Ellie nodded, smoothing a gentle hand over the cub's head. I've got you, she whispered. It's okay. You're safe. The cub leaned into her palm, his tiny body settling. The lioness, even in her state, seemed to sense the shift. Her chest rose and fell in a slower, steadier rhythm. One of the officers knelt beside Dr. Harper, tools in hand. Snares wrapped tight, going to have to cut it off carefully to avoid tearing more tissue. Easy, she warned. If she reacts, we stop. They worked slowly, methodically, the clink of metal echoing against the shed walls. Ellie flinched each time the lioness tensed, her muscles spasming from pain. The officers' movements were deliberate, almost reverent. Men and women trained to respect the wild even while saving it. Mark moved closer to Ellie, kneeling beside her. You doing okay? Ellie shook her head. I'm scared. That's normal, he said gently. But you're doing exactly what we need you to do. That little guy trusts you. Ellie met his eyes, surprised. How can he? I've never seen a lion before today. Doesn't matter, Mark said. Animals know when someone means no harm. And today, you were the safest place he could find. Ellie looked down at the cub. His golden eyes met hers for a brief, fragile moment before closing again as he pressed into her warmth. A sudden sharp cry broke through the air. The lioness, pain surging through her as the officer loosened the final twist of the snare. Ellie gasped. The cub yelped and pushed frantically against her arms, trying to reach his mother. "It's okay, little one," Ellie whispered urgently, tightening her hold just enough to keep him safe. "She's right there. They're helping her." The lioness sagged into the straw as the snare finally came free. The wound beneath it was raw, swollen, and bleeding slowly. Dr. Harper immediately applied pressure with layered padding, her voice calm but firm. "Keep the compress steady. We need to stop the bleeding before we attempt to move her." Another officer prepared a syringe, handing it carefully to the vet. "Pain management?" "Low dose," Dr. Harper instructed. "Enough to ease her, not enough to sedate. I want her aware when we move her." Ellie watched every motion, feeling each one like a tug against her own chest. The cub nuzzled her anxiously, squeaking soft cries in the direction of his mother. Ellie bent her head and kissed the top of his fur without thinking. "We'll get her through this," she whispered. "I'm right here." The lioness lifted her head weakly at the sound of Ellie's voice, her eyes finding the cub in her arms. Despite everything, her pain, her fear, her weakening state, she gave a feeble, trembling rumble, barely a sound at all. "She's calling to him," Dr. Harper said softly. "She's reminding him she's here." The moment sank into Ellie like a stone. She didn't know how a mother could be so strong, even when she had almost nothing left to give. It made her hold the cub even more carefully, more protectively. A gust of wind slammed against the shed then, scattering straw and rattling the boards hard enough to make the whole structure groan. Mark looked toward the sky. "That storm's coming faster than expected. We've got to move soon." Dr. Harper nodded. "One more minute. I want her as stable as we can get her." While they worked, Ellie became aware of something else. The cub's behavior changed. He lifted his head higher, sniffing the air, restless. Then, with a sudden burst of fragile energy, he twisted in her arms, pushing his nose toward the pasture behind them. "What is it?" Ellie asked softly. The cub whimpered again, more urgently this time. His body leaned forward, paw stretching in a clear direction, toward the open stretch of frozen field, toward the place where the trail of blood had begun. Ellie followed his gaze, and for a moment, something cold crawled up her spine. "Dr. Harper?" she said cautiously. I think he wants us to know something." Harper paused mid-dress, glancing over. "What do you mean?" "He keeps looking out there." Ellie shifted the cub gently. "Like there's something else we need to see." Mark's brow furrowed, scanning the landscape. The wind swept hard across the field, dragging low curls of snow along the ground. The sky above seemed to darken by a shade. The cub whined, a soft, straining cry that trembled with fear and urgency. Ellie felt it vibrate straight into her bones. "There might be more tracks out there," Mark said quietly. Dr. Harper's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "We'll check it. But first she needs to be moved before the storm hits." The officers prepared the stretcher, pulling it beside the lioness. Every movement made her flinch, her strength faltering. Ellie felt the cub's heartbeat racing against her palm. "I know," Ellie whispered to him. "I know. She's coming with us." Mark and two officers positioned themselves around the lioness, careful and slow. Dr. Harper steadied her head, murmuring soft assurances as they prepared to lift her. "All right," Mark said. "On my count. 1, 2. The cub squirmed suddenly, crying out louder than before. Ellie held her breath. 3. They lifted. The lioness gasped in pain. Ellie gasped with her. The cub let out a helpless cry that echoed through the frozen air. But they moved, carefully, steadily, toward the waiting stretcher. The lioness trembled violently at first, but Dr. Harper kept a steady hand on her shoulder, whispering a quiet, calming rhythm that eased her quaking muscles. Ellie held the cub close, feeling his small heart race like a tiny drum. Behind them, the wind roared across the field, sharp and rising. Ahead of them, the rescue team worked with practiced resolve, and Ellie walked right beside them, the cub in her arms, as they carried his mother toward the only chance she had left. The unknown still lay ahead, whatever the cub had been trying to warn them about, but the rescue had begun. There was no turning back now. Snow swirled harder across the pasture as Ellie followed the team, clutching the cub to her chest while they carried the lioness toward the stretcher. The mother's breath came in uneven bursts, each one sounding thinner, weaker, as if the cold itself were stealing her strength. Ellie walked beside them, every instinct urging her to stay close, to let the lioness know her cub was still safe. The wind whipped across her face, stinging her cheeks. Dr. Harper motioned for the team to stop a moment so she could adjust the compression wrap around the lioness's wounded leg. Blood had seeped through the first layer of bandage, darkening the fabric. Ellie felt her stomach twist. "Easy, girl. Easy," Harper murmured, voice calm even as her hands moved with urgency. "We're taking you home." The lioness lifted her head just enough to see her cub. Her eyes softened, a mother's instinct shining through the pain. The cub squeaked, pawing in the air as though trying to reach her. "It's okay," Ellie whispered, brushing her thumb gently over the cub's cheek. "You'll be together soon." But as she said the words, something cold crept down her spine. An intuition, a silent alarm ringing beneath the surface. The shed behind them creaked, a low groan carried by the growing wind. One of the officers turned briefly, scanning the pasture behind the structure. Mark noticed. "Something wrong?" The officer hesitated, then shook his head. "Probably nothing. This wind's making everything sound worse than it is." But Ellie wasn't so sure. The cub hadn't stopped staring toward the shed's far corner, the same spot where the blood trail curved sharply into shadow. His body tensed again, tiny muscles bunching beneath her jacket, his claws gripping the cloth as if bracing for something unseen. Ellie forced her focus back to the lioness. Dr. Harper nodded and signaled the team. "All right, let's get her onto the stretcher." 3 officers positioned themselves around the lioness while Mark steadied her head. Harper kept a firm hand near the wound, watching for any sudden reaction. They moved with a synchronized rhythm, ready for a struggle but hoping she had enough trust left to accept the help. "On my count," Mark said quietly. 1, 2, 3. The lioness tensed in agony as they lifted. A broken cry escaped her jaws, so raw and full of anguish that Ellie felt tears rising instantly. She pressed the cub closer to her chest to keep him calm, whispering soft reassurances through trembling lips. The lioness's body shook violently at first, her instincts fighting the pain and fear. Her muscles quivered, her claws scraping weakly against the frozen straw. Then she heard the cub's cry. The cub squirmed in Ellie's arms, letting out a trembling whimper that echoed through the shed. The lioness froze, her whole body stilled, eyes snapping to her baby, breath halting in her throat. And slowly, painfully, she went still enough for the team to lower her onto the stretcher. Ellie felt the moment like a fist squeezing her heart. Even in agony, even on the edge of collapse, the lioness chose trust. She chose her baby. As soon as she settled onto the stretcher, her breaths came faster, but steadier, almost as though she knew relief was closer now. "Good girl," Dr. Harper whispered. "You're doing beautifully." The officers secured her gently, adjusting straps around her torso and uninjured limbs. Mark smoothed a padded blanket over her side to shield her from the cold. "That's it," he murmured. "You hold on for your little one." Ellie stepped closer, letting the cub peek out from the blanket. He whimpered softly, reaching toward his mother. The lioness's ear twitched. Her muscles relaxed, Her shuttered eyes opened halfway, finding them both. It was the gentlest look Ellie had ever seen. The kind of look a mother gives her child when she wants them to know she's fighting to stay alive. "Let's move," Mark said, lifting the stretcher with the others. "Storm's coming in fast." The sky overhead had darkened significantly, clouds gathering in thick sheets. Snow swept sideways across the field, blurring the edges of the barn and the distant hills. The temperature dropped sharply, turning Ellie's breath into thick fog. Halfway across the pasture, the cub suddenly stiffened in her arms. Ellie stopped mid-step. "What is it?" she whispered. The cub stared back toward the shed, eyes wide, pupils dilated, tiny body trembling in a way that no longer felt like cold, but fear. Mark noticed Ellie's sudden stop. "Everything okay?" Ellie opened her mouth to answer, but the wind shifted, and a faint, distant sound drifted toward them. A low groan, something heavy shifting, something breathing, not the lioness, not the cub, something else. One of the officers turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could respond, the wind swallowed the sound again, leaving only the rising whistle of the approaching storm. Dr. Harper scanned the pasture. "We don't have time for detours. We need to get her to the truck." Mark hesitated for a second, eyes on the rim of the shed's shadow. Then he responded firmly. "Move. We'll check it later." They continued across the pasture, but Ellie's skin prickled with unease. She glanced back one last time. The shed stood silent in the storm's early swirl, its wooden boards creaking softly. But Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching them. The cub remained tense until they reached the vehicle. When the team lifted the stretcher up the ramp, the cub let out a tiny cry, pushing toward his mother with renewed urgency. Ellie followed, climbing inside the rescue truck as the doors closed behind them. Snow hammered the roof almost immediately, a storm now fully awakened. Ellie sat beside the lioness, holding the cub close as the team worked to stabilize the injured mother. The lioness's breathing steadied slightly as warm air filled the enclosed space. The storm raged outside. The lioness fought to stay alive, and the cub trembled in Ellie's arms. Whatever he had been trying to warn them about was still out there. And the worst part was, the storm was only just beginning. The moment the rescue truck lurched forward, the world outside vanished into a curtain of white. Snow slammed sideways against the metal frame, pellets of ice rattling across the roof like a warning drum. The windows fogged instantly, then cleared in streaks only to fog again as the heater fought the freezing air. Ellie tightened her hold on the cub, feeling his tiny body stiffen every time the wind struck the truck with a heavy shove. Dr. Harper knelt beside the lioness, her gloved hands moving with controlled urgency as she checked the bandages and reapplied pressure where blood seeped through. "Pulse is still weak," she said, voice low but steady. "Respiration shallow. We need to keep her warm and stable until we reach the center." Mark, gripping the handrail in the back of the truck, nodded grimly. "Roads are icing fast. We'll go as smooth as we can." The lioness let out a faint, broken groan as the truck hit a dip in the pasture. Ellie's heart squeezed at the sound. She scooted closer, keeping the cub pressed against her chest as she reached out a trembling hand. Dr. Harper gave her a brief nod, allowing her to stay near. "It's okay," Ellie whispered, leaning in so the lioness could see her and the cub. "We're here. You're not alone. Just hold on." The lioness blinked slowly, her eyes fluttering with exhaustion. A soft rumble, something between pain and recognition, vibrated from her throat. Ellie swallowed hard, brushing the cub's fur gently with her thumb to calm him. But the cub wasn't calming this time. His tiny body stayed rigid, warmth trembling through her arms as he stared toward the back doors with wide, alert eyes. Ellie followed his gaze. There was nothing but the vibrating metal doors and the whirling snow outside the small rear window, but the cub wouldn't look away. Something in him felt the storm, or sensed the danger, or remembered something terrible in the direction they had left behind. "We'll check that shed when the weather breaks," Mark muttered, noticing the cub's focus as well. "Right now, she needs us more." Dr. Harper nodded as she prepared an injection. "Small dose of pain relief. We need her calm, but conscious." The lioness flinched weakly as the needle entered the muscle of her flank. Ellie winced too, her body reacting instinctively. She felt the cub's claws tense against her coat. "You're okay. You're okay," Ellie murmured soothingly. The lioness's eyes moved toward Ellie again, and in that moment, through the pain and fear, there was something gentle, something pleading. The connection made Ellie's throat tighten with emotion. She shifted back slightly as the truck bounced again. The heater hummed loudly, doing its best to push warm air into the cabin. The lioness's breath created faint clouds in the frigid space. "Storm's closing fast," one of the officers at the front cabin called back. "Visibility's dropping to almost nothing. Roads ahead are iced over." "Take it slow," Mark instructed. "This mother won't survive a jolt." The truck slowed, crawling across the snowy fields as though pushing through mud. The rumbling engine was the only steady sound, battling the wind that slammed relentlessly against the sides. Ellie shrank into the corner seat, the cub tucked beneath her coat for warmth. She tried to keep her breathing steady, tried to stay strong, but fear crept in anyway. Fear of losing the lioness, fear of what the cub sensed behind them, fear of the storm swallowing the truck whole. "Ellie," Dr. Harper said softly, "talk to her." Ellie blinked through the sting in her eyes. "Me?" "You're the most familiar thing she has. Your voice calms her. It helps more than you realize." So Ellie spoke. She murmured gentle words, her voice unsteady at first, then growing more sure as she saw the lioness's breathing ease, just a little, with the sound of her voice. She told her she was brave. She told her her baby was safe. She told her the nightmare was almost over. With every whispered word, the lioness's eyes closed a little deeper, not fading, but resting. Outside, the wind howled so violently that the truck shook. Snow pelted against the windshield in blinding sheets. The driver cursed under his breath as the wheels slid slightly to the side before gripping again. "Come on," Mark muttered under his breath. "Hold the line. Hold the line." Another sharp gust hit. The truck rocked. Ellie instinctively covered the cub with both arms. The lioness twitched in pain from the sudden movement. "Sorry, girl. We're almost there. Almost there." Dr. Harper kept her voice as steady as humanly possible, though tension filled her shoulders. The whole world seemed to dissolve into white fury for several minutes, only the shuddering of the metal frame and the muffled roar of the storm breaking the rattling silence. Then, finally, the vehicle pushed through a break in the wind. The snow lessened for a moment. The ice fog eased. "Road ahead looks better," the driver called. Mark exhaled slowly. "Good. We need every second." Ellie rested her cheek gently against the cub's head, feeling the warmth of his tiny body. Her heart slowed just enough to let her breathe again, but then, without warning, the cub jerked his head up and let out a sharp, frightened cry. Not a whimper, not a plea, an alarm. Ellie stiffened. "What is it?" The cub pawed frantically at her coat, eyes wild with fear again. It wasn't the storm he sensed. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the movement of the truck. He was crying in the direction they'd come from. Crying like he'd left something behind. Crying like something terrible had pushed them into running. Ellie's skin crawled. She held him tighter. Mark caught the look on her face. "Ellie? What's wrong?" She shook her head slowly, eyes wide. He's scared of something out there." The officer frowned. "Something following us?" "No, Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. Something back where we found his mother. The cabin fell silent. Dr. Harper looked up from her work, understanding flashing in her eyes. That means, she said slowly, whatever attacked her might still be out there. A deep, dreadful stillness filled the truck. The cub pressed himself so hard against Ellie's chest that she felt his tiny heartbeat pulsing fast and panicked beneath her hands. Outside, the storm screamed again, but inside, something far colder settled in the air. Whatever had hurt the lioness wasn't finished, and once the storm passed, they would have to face it. The truck groaned as it fought its way down the icy service road, the engine straining against the rising wind. Snow swirled so thick outside the windows that the world looked like it had been erased. Ellie tightened her grip on the cub, feeling the tremor of fear racing through his tiny body. His ears stayed pinned back, his little paws clutching her coat, as if he believed the storm itself meant danger. But it wasn't the storm. It was whatever waited behind it. The lioness stirred suddenly on the stretcher, her muscles twitching beneath the blankets. Dr. Harper glanced up sharply. She's reacting to something. Check her vitals. An officer leaned in with a handheld monitor, his breath fogging in the cold. Heart rate spiking. She's panicking. Ellie lifted her head, startled. Why? We're safe in here. But even as she said it, she saw the lioness's eyes, half open, glazed with pain, but moving, searching, desperate. The cub whimpered, sensing the shift before anyone else. He tried to leap from Ellie's arms, crying out toward his mother. She held him tighter, afraid he'd hurt himself or scare her more. It's okay, little guy, Ellie whispered. She's right here. But the lioness didn't seem soothed. She struggled against the straps, not with anger, but terror. Her breath came in short, frantic bursts. Her claws flexed weakly against the stretcher padding. A low, broken moan escaped her throat, a sound Ellie had not heard from her yet. What's happening? Ellie cried. She thinks she's being taken away from him, Dr. Harper said urgently. She's realizing he's not beside her. She's losing her sense of control. She's afraid we're separating them, Mark added, bracing his hands against the wall as the truck bumped over a patch of ice. We need her calm or she'll tear those stitches before they even get put in. Dr. Harper moved closer to the lioness's head, her voice low and soothing. Easy, girl. Easy. He's safe. Your baby's safe. But the lioness's breathing only quickened, her chest rising in shallow, desperate jerks. The truck jolted again, and she lurched forward, her entire body trembling with instinctive terror. Ellie's heart pounded. She couldn't stand to see her like this. I can bring him closer, she said quickly. She needs to see him. No, Mark said immediately. We're not putting him within reach until she's sedated and stable. She isn't trying to hurt anyone, Ellie insisted, tears rising as the lioness let out another quivering moan. She thinks he's gone. Another violent shake rocked through the lioness's body, her eyes rolling as she tensed against the straps. The cub wailed in Ellie's arms, tiny voice cracking with panic. The lioness heard it and froze. Every muscle in her body went still. Her shaking stopped. Her breathing slowed, not easing, but focusing. Her eyes opened wide and she stared directly at Ellie. Bring him here, Dr. Harper ordered suddenly. Now! Mark snapped to her. Harper, she's not thrashing in aggression, Dr. Harper said firmly. She's trying to reach her cub. If we don't show him to her, she'll injure herself fighting the restraints. Let Ellie kneel just close enough for the mother to see him. The decision had been made. Ellie didn't wait for a second invitation. She slipped from the bench seat onto her knees and leaned forward slowly, holding the cub securely, but lowering him toward the lioness's line of sight. It's okay. I've got you, she whispered. The cub stretched his tiny neck, letting out a soft cry that vibrated with fear and longing. The lioness's entire face changed. Her eyes softened, melted even, into something so warm and pure it broke something open inside Ellie's chest. The panic draining from her gaze was instant, as though one single cry from her baby pulled her out of the depths of terror. Her breath steadied, her muscles loosened. She sagged into the stretcher, exhausted but no longer frantic. "She's stabilizing," an officer said, watching the monitor. Dr. Harper nodded. She just needed to know he was near. Ellie let out a shaky breath of relief, feeling the tension seep from her limbs. The cub quieted in her arms, his body relaxing as he watched his mother breathe easier. But the moment of calm didn't last. A sudden violent blast of wind slammed into the truck, pushing it sideways. The driver shouted from the front cabin, "Hold on!" The truck skidded on the icy road, the world outside nothing but a blur of white. The stretcher lurched despite being bolted down. Ellie threw herself sideways, shielding the cub as equipment rattled and officers grabbed onto rails. The vehicle slid for what felt like an eternity, then finally gripped, then finally slowed, then finally stopped. Everyone froze in place, breaths thick in the cold air. The lioness whimpered softly, her strength nearly gone. Dr. Harper steadied herself and checked the straps. "All right," Mark said tightly. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah," an officer answered. "Truck's still drivable, but we need to move slower. Road's turning into glass." Ellie didn't speak. Her hands were shaking, heart pounding. The cub pressed tightly to her chest. She could still feel the echo of the lioness's terror inside her own bones. But something else gnawed at her too. A heavier dread she couldn't shake. The cub's fear hadn't been about the storm, and the lioness's panic hadn't just been about losing sight of her baby. There was something else binding the fear between them. Something that had driven the cub out into the cold to find help. Something that had trapped the mother and left her bleeding in the straw. Something that could still be out there. Mark looked at Ellie, his voice low and cautious. "Once she's safe and you're out of this storm, we're going back." Ellie's breath caught. To the shed. To the pasture. To the blood trail. To whatever had hurt this family. But right now, the lioness trembled weakly, her breath shallow and uneven. Dr. Harper focused in again. "We need to get her to the center. Focus on that. One step at a time." Ellie nodded, tightening her hold on the cub. Whatever dangers waited out there, one thing was certain. This mother and her baby were still alive, and Ellie would fight to keep it that way. The storm raged on outside, but inside the truck, something stronger held them together. A promise, a bond, and the first fragile glimmer of hope. The rescue truck pushed forward, deeper into the blinding white of the Idaho blizzard. Snow hammered the roof in relentless waves, rattling the metal like 1,000 tiny fists. The windows shook with every gust, the headlights barely carving slivers through the roaring wall of ice outside. Ellie pressed the cub against her chest, her breath warm against his fur as she tried to shelter him from the trembling world around them. The lioness lay strapped to the stretcher, her body rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Dr. Harper hovered beside her, adjusting the oxygen mask and wrapping another thermal blanket around her torso. The mother's breaths were shallow, but steady enough that Harper didn't look completely terrified, just fiercely focused, like a woman who refused to lose her patient without a fight. Mark steadied himself with a hand on the rail overhead as the truck bounced along the icy road. "We're hitting the service path now," he called toward the front. "Once we clear the ridge, it should level out." "Should," the driver muttered under his breath. Another sharp blast of wind smacked the truck sideways. Ellie braced herself against the wall and instinctively curled around the cub. He squeaked in fear, but didn't struggle. His small body shook against her arms, and she whispered into his fur, "It's okay. You're safe. Stay with me." The lioness heard her voice. Even through her pain, even through the storm and the shaking, her eyes drifted open just barely, and shifted toward Ellie and the cub. The look she gave was too soft, too human, too full of exhausted gratitude to belong to a creature that big. Ellie blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. Dr. Harper glanced over and nodded gently. She hears you. Keep talking. It helps her keep fighting. Ellie swallowed. Hey, Mama, she whispered, leaning forward just enough for the lioness to see her clearly. We're getting you out of this. We're almost there. Hold on for your baby. The lioness closed her eyes in response, as if accepting the promise. But then the truck jerked violently. You've got to be kidding me! Ice! The driver shouted. The wheels spun for a terrifying second before catching, throwing everyone forward. A metal tray slid off a shelf, clattering across the floor. One of the officers grabbed the stretcher rails before the lioness could be jostled. Mark swore under his breath. These roads weren't supposed to freeze this fast. It's the wind chill, another officer said, peering through the frost-covered window. Feels like the temperature's dropping by the minute. The cub whimpered again, sensing the tension before the humans even registered it. He pushed his tiny face deeper into Ellie's jacket, shivering in fear. Ellie tightened her hold, rocking him gently. You're okay. I've got you. As she soothed him, Dr. Harper checked the lioness's vitals again. Her brow furrowed. She's fading faster, Harper murmured. Her temperature's dropping too much. Mark's jaw clenched. How much time? I can't say for sure, Harper answered, but this storm is not helping. Ellie's heart constricted sharply. Please, don't let her... She's not giving up, Harper said firmly. Look. The lioness's paw twitched, not violently, not desperately, just enough to reach toward the blanket, as if reminding them she was still here, still fighting, still trying. Let's push through this last stretch, Mark said. Harper, how long once we hit the main road? 10 minutes, maybe less. Driver, Mark called, voice steady but tense. Whatever you do, keep this truck upright. The driver didn't answer, but the engine growled louder as he pushed the vehicle forward through the whiteout. Ellie pressed her forehead gently to the cub's. His tiny heartbeat fluttered like a fragile drum against her palms. She whispered to him, voice trembling. She's going to make it. She has to. The cub's trembling slowed. Just slightly. Just enough to tell Ellie he was listening. The road evened out for a brief, blessed moment. The shaking stopped. The wind quieted to a low roar. The truck's tires found traction. Looks like we're past the worst of it, the driver called out. Relief rippled through the cabin. But then, without warning, a deep thud slammed into the side of the truck. The impact rattled the frame so violently that Ellie lost her breath. The cub cried out. The lioness jerked on the stretcher, her eyes flying open in panic. Mark grabbed the rail. What was that? The driver's voice came through, tight with alarm. Branch fell from a tree. Must have snapped in the storm. Dr. Harper steadied the lioness, brushing her gloved hand down the animal's neck. Easy, girl. It's okay. You're safe. Ellie forced herself to breathe again. Her arms wrapped around the cub, trembling from the scare. We're okay. We're okay. Another jolt. Another tremor of fear from the cub. Another spike in the lioness's breathing. The storm was still fighting them. Hang on, the driver warned. We're turning onto the paved road. The truck slowed, tires crunching over frozen gravel until finally, the rumble beneath them changed. Smoother. Straighter. Mark checked the window. I think we're clear. Harper, how's she doing? Harper didn't answer immediately. She checked the lioness again, her face softening only slightly. She's hanging by a thread, she said at last. But she's still with us. Ellie exhaled, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. The cub nuzzled his face into her chest, calmer now. The lioness watched them through half-open eyes, her breath faint but steady. Ellie moved closer, whispering, "Just a little longer. Please." Snow continued to fall, but softer now, no longer a violent storm, but a steady blanket from the gray sky above. Ahead of them, the faint glow of the wildlife center appeared through the frozen haze. Mark pointed. "There. That's our beacon." Dr. Harper nodded. "And her last chance." As the truck rolled toward the lights, Ellie felt the cub's tiny heartbeat steady beneath her fingers. A bond, a fragile hope, and a fight still burning in all three of them. They weren't safe yet. But for the first time since the cub found her in the barn, Ellie let herself believe that they might make it. The truck rolled toward the wildlife center, its headlights carving weak tunnels of light through the falling snow. The storm had eased, but the cold still clung to the air like something alive, sharp, heavy, suffocating. Ellie held the cub close, listening to his tiny breaths and feeling the soft thrum of his heartbeat through her jacket. He was still afraid, but less frantic now. Somewhere deep inside him, he seemed to understand that they were heading toward safety. The lioness lay motionless on the stretcher except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. Dr. Harper knelt beside her, adjusting the oxygen flow and checking the wound one more time. The bleeding had slowed, but the damage ran deep. Ellie tried not to stare at the swollen flesh around the snare wound. It looked too painful to be real. Everything inside Ellie clenched as she whispered, "Just hold on, Mama. Just a little more." The lioness's eye twitched open. A soft, barely there rumble escaped her throat. Weak but unmistakable. Ellie felt tears burn her eyes again. That tiny sound told her more than words ever could. She wasn't giving up. The truck pulled into the snow-packed lot of the center. A team of staff in winter gear was already waiting, a line of silhouettes illuminated by floodlights. As soon as the doors opened, cold air swept in again, and the team sprang into motion. "Let's move! She's fading! Bring the thermal blankets! Harper, we've got the surgical bay prepped!" Ellie stepped out with the cub still tucked under her jacket. The brightness of the lights stung her eyes after so long in the storm darkness. Mark helped her down, steadying her elbow. "You stay with me," he said gently. "We'll get her inside." Ellie nodded, though her breath trembled with fear and relief. A woman in a heavy coat ran up with a heated pad. "Is that the cub?" Ellie nodded again. "He won't leave her. Please keep him warm." "We will," the woman said, taking a gentle hold of Ellie's arm to lead her inside. The lioness was lifted from the truck with the utmost care. The team moved fast, but never rushed, every step balanced between urgency and caution. Ellie hurried alongside them, her footsteps crunching in the snow as they brought the lioness through double doors into the bright warmth of the veterinary facility. The heat inside hit Ellie like a wave. The cub blinked against the sudden change in temperature, relaxing slightly under the warmth. The lioness, too, seemed to breathe a little easier as the cold fell away from her battered body. "Bring her to Bay 2, Dr. Harper instructed. "Let's get her on the table." Ellie watched with her heart in her throat as the lioness was transferred to a padded surgical table. Lights glowed bright above, casting everything in sterile clarity. The room smelled like antiseptic and warm air and something else. Hope. Harper slipped on a fresh pair of gloves. "Let's get started. We need to clean the wound thoroughly and start antibiotics." Ellie stood just outside the doorway, hugging the cub tightly, afraid to blink, afraid to breathe too loudly. She knew she wasn't supposed to be this close to a rescue operation, but no one asked her to leave. The cub wouldn't let her, and the lioness, well, it seemed she didn't want Ellie gone either. "Vitals are holding," one of the technicians said, reading the monitor. "Weak, but stable enough for treatment." "That's all we need," Dr. Harper replied. "Let's give her a fighting chance." They worked quickly, cleaning the wound with careful precision. The snare had cut deeper than Ellie realized, far deeper. She winced as she saw the extent of the damage, unsure how the lioness had even been able to drag herself as far as she had. "You're doing so well," Harper whispered to the lioness, as if she were comforting a scared child. "Such a brave girl." Ellie swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never seen such tenderness directed at a wild animal. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't expect. The cub squirmed gently in her arms, letting out a tiny sound. Ellie loosened the blanket just enough so he could peek out. His golden eyes reflected the bright surgical lights as he stared toward his mother. When the cub whimpered again, the lioness reacted. Her ears twitched. Her chest lifted just a little more. Her entire body seemed to try, just for a moment, to rise. "She hears him," Ellie whispered, awed. Dr. Harper paused, glancing toward Ellie and the cub. "Good. That means she's still connected. Keep him close, just within her view." Ellie stepped forward slightly, careful not to cross the threshold. She lifted the cub so he was visible from the lioness's angle. His eyes glimmered as he stared at his mother, his tiny paws stretching out as if to touch the air between them. "It's okay," Ellie breathed. "She's right here. She's fighting." The lioness let out a soft, shaky rumble, so faint Ellie almost missed it, and then something incredible happened. As the team applied the first round of antibiotics, cleaned the wound, and secured the bandages, the lioness's breathing changed. It grew deeper, more rhythmic. Still raspy from exhaustion, but steadier. Her pulse, shown by a small glowing number on the monitor, ticked up by a single point. Then another. Ellie clapped a hand to her mouth to stifle her sob. The cub wriggled in excitement, tail twitching beneath the blanket. The lioness lifted her head a fraction. Just a fraction. And her gaze settled on Ellie. Not on the doctors. Not on the lights. On Ellie. As if she knew. As if she understood. As if she was saying thank you with the only strength she had left. Dr. Harper's voice softened. "Her vitals are responding. She's stabilizing. Slowly, but she is." Ellie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The cub pressed his forehead into her collarbone, his body relaxing for the first time since they left the barn. Ellie brushed her fingers through his fur, whispering a choked, "We did it. Hang in there, Mama. Please." Harper loosened her gloves and stepped back, letting the team finish securing the bandages. "She's not out of the woods yet," she said quietly to Ellie, "but she made it through the worst part." Ellie nodded, her tears finally falling freely. "She's so strong." "She is," Harper said softly. "Stronger than most creatures I've ever treated." The lioness lowered her head again, curling her paws slightly under her chest as warmth filled the room. The cub gave one last soft sound, then finally relaxed into sleep against Ellie. And in that quiet, bright moment among beeping monitors and gentle hands, the first true sign of recovery appeared. The lioness purred. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the hum of a distant engine. But it was real. A sound of comfort, a sound of hope, a sound that told the world she was choosing to live. Ellie cried openly, clutching the cub as the lioness's soft purrs filled the room. For the first time, it felt like they were not just surviving the storm, but emerging from it. A full week passed before Ellie returned to the wildlife center. The storm had long cleared, leaving behind crisp blue skies and a landscape glazed with a soft shimmer of snow. The air carried that quiet stillness only winter mornings could hold, the kind that made every sound feel sharper, every moment feel more sacred. She walked through the entrance with the cub's blanket folded neatly in her hands, her heart thudding as she stepped into the familiar warmth of the recovery wing. It still smelled faintly of antiseptic and heated air, but today something gentler lingered there too. Hope. Mark greeted her near the door, his smile warm beneath the brim of his hat. "She's awake," he said softly. "Been waiting for you." Ellie's breath trembled. "She remembers?" "I think so," he replied. "She's been restless all morning, calmed down only when the cub started crying for his feeding." Ellie followed him toward the enclosure. The glass glowed softly with the overhead lights, and straw rustled gently as a golden shape shifted within. Dr. Harper stood beside the enclosure door, hands folded in front of her, a small, proud smile on her face. "Ready to say hello?" Harper asked. Ellie nodded, though her throat felt tight with emotion. Inside, the lioness lifted her head. She looked nothing like the wounded creature they'd found in the cold. No longer shaking, no longer gasping for breath. She was still bandaged from hip to paw, still healing, still fragile. But her eyes were alive, alert, aware. And the moment she saw Ellie, those eyes softened. Ellie froze, breath catching in her chest. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. The lioness gave a quiet rumble, a soft, gentle sound that vibrated low and steady through the enclosure. Harper nodded at Ellie's stunned expression. "She hasn't done that for anyone but her cub," Harper said. "Until now." The door slid open just enough for Ellie to step inside the holding area, separated from the lioness only by a waist-high barrier. Straw cushioned the ground, warm under the heat lamps. Beside the lioness, curled against her side with sleepy contentment, was the cub. He looked up at the sound of Ellie's footsteps, blinking drowsily. Then, with a clumsy hop, he bounded toward her, still small, still wobbly, but filled with unmistakable recognition. Ellie knelt just in time to catch him as he climbed clumsily into her lap. A soft laugh escaped her as she held him close. "Hey there, little guy. You're getting stronger." Behind him, the lioness shifted, sliding her good paw forward, inching closer. Her movements were slow, cautious, but deliberate. She lowered her head, her golden gaze flicking between her cub and Ellie. Then she breathed out, deep and steady. That exhale held everything: relief, recognition, gratitude. Harper watched the exchange quietly. "She trusts you," she said. "And big cats don't give their trust lightly." Ellie swallowed, smoothing her hand over the cub's back. "I didn't do much." Harper shook her head gently. "You saved her son, and you stayed when you could have run. Sometimes that's everything." The cub nuzzled Ellie's hands, purring his tiny rumble that matched his mother's deeper one. Ellie lifted him carefully, holding him so he faced the lioness. The mother's ears twitched, and she leaned forward, brushing her nose against her baby's fur. It was a moment so tender that Ellie's eyes warmed with tears. "You're okay," she whispered to both of them. "You're really okay." The lioness shifted again, carefully easing herself into a more upright position. Her paw extended, slow, deliberate, coming to rest just inches from Ellie's own hand. Not a threat, not a warning, an offering. Ellie stared at that great paw, bandaged and scarred, trembling slightly from weakness and weight. She placed her hand on the edge of the barrier, close but not touching. The lioness lowered her head, closing her eyes as if in acceptance. Mark's voice was low from behind her. "That right there," he murmured, "is as close to a thank you as you'll ever get from a wild mother." Ellie felt her heart swell in her chest. "She's the brave one," she said softly. "She kept fighting for him." Harper smiled. "Maybe, but she wasn't fighting alone." The cub, done with his greeting, wriggled free and stumbled back to his mother, curling into her chest. She wrapped a protective paw around him, her body sheltering him with instinctive grace, even in her healing. Ellie watched them, her breath slow and steady, a warmth glowing in her chest that she didn't know how to put into words. She remembered the broken snare, the trail of blood, the storm, the desperate cry behind the barn, and the tiny paws that had pressed into her boots like a plea from a child. Now those paws were warm and strong, tucked safely beneath the mother who had nearly been lost. Harper stepped beside her. When she's fully healed, we'll release them together. They'll go back home as a family. Ellie nodded, wiping her cheek. That's all I want. The lioness lifted her head one more time, her gaze resting on Ellie with a depth that made time feel slower. A bond had been forged in the cold and danger and fear. A bond that didn't need words. A bond that would last far beyond the walls of this place. Ellie leaned forward, voice soft and reverent. Thank you for trusting me. The lioness blinked, a slow, heavy blink, and in it was a message Ellie understood without needing translation. You kept my child alive. You brought us back to the light, and I will carry this trust with me always. Outside, winter sunlight spilled across the snowy fields, bright and warm despite the cold. Inside the enclosure, mother and child lay nestled together, safe at last. And for the first time since everything began, Ellie felt a peace settle deep in her heart. A reminder that even in the wildest storms, love and courage can stitch the world back together. If this story touched you even a little, let me know down below. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments, anything, to show you're here with us. And if you want to follow Ellie, the lioness, and more incredible rescues just like this one, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story. Your one small comment or click helps this community grow, and I'd love to have you with us for the next adventure.